The Living Clean podcast is not affiliated with Narcotics Anonymous, nor do we speak on behalf of NA as a whole. We are simply members sharing our personal experiences and perspectives in recovery based discussions. The opinions expressed here are our own and not those of Narcotics Anonymous as a fellowship. This is the Living Clean podcast. This podcast is not meant to replace meetings, sponsorship, step work, or service. This podcast is meant to be another tool in your recovery toolbox. Our guests are here to share their experience, strength, and hope with recovery through Narcotics Anonymous. Thank you for joining us. All right, welcome back to the Living Clean podcast. It's Mason S. I'm an addict, back for another episode. Today we're going to have a conversation with our good friend Jimmy. But first, we're going to get into introductions. I'm going to kick it over to the co-host with the most, Francis.
Francis Addict, clean date 12/22/92. Home group is You Are the book study in Chico, California.
And then joining us for this conversation, coming back to the podcast for, I don't know, the second or third time, Shanna.
Good morning, guys. My name's Shanna. I'm an addict. My clean date is 11/5/12. My home group is also You Are the Book, Chico, California, 6:30 a.m. Tuesdays and Thursdays.
All right. Welcome back, Shanna. And then our
Thanks.
friend Jimmy.
Yeah, hi guys. My name is Jimmy S. And my clean date is November 2nd, 1984. And my home group is Steps to Freedom. We meet at 12 noon in Las Vegas on Saturday at 101 South Rancho. Come on by.
Awesome. Well, welcome back, Jimmy. Jimmy, this is also your second time on, and I always tell this story about the conscious contact episode that we did about how much of a trooper you were that day. We had intended for each person to share on each paragraph for about 3 to 5 minutes tops, and it just turned into this, like, basically a speaker jam over each paragraph where each person, was taking 15, 20, 30 minutes at sometimes to share. But it was so phenomenal that we didn't dare step in and try to stop it just because it was such a, I'm sure Francis was sweating bullets, but
In my mind.
yeah, Jimmy was, we did 9 paragraphs. Jimmy was number 9 on the list. He had the very last paragraph, and 2 hours later, he still hung in there to share, and yeah, it was great. So I always appreciated that, Jimmy.
Yeah, well, on my side of it, it wasn't too tough because there was so much, recovery shared during that meeting, and I didn't have any time constraints that day, so it was a pleasure to me just to be there, tie it up at the end.
Yeah, was there any pressure on being the anchor of that marathon?
I don't think so. No.
That was my official sports metaphor for Mason.
Funny, yeah, no, it was okay.
Francis tries to introduce a new sports metaphor every episode now. The last one was cheerleading, which I appreciated. Jimmy, what's your thoughts on the Living Clean book?
The Living Clean book? Oh, yeah, I love it. I just love it. When it first came out, there was maybe some controversy or some pushback from people who were like staunch basic text. I don't know if you got that vibe, but I look, it's NA literature, and I've learned to just really open my mind to what's coming up, and I loved it because I came out at a time when I had decades clean, and a lot of the content in there is the things that we go through when, after a long time. And so it was really, really a beautiful book. I love it today. I hope it's right. It's right. I always have it right next to me. It's right there on my shelf, and I open it all the time.
Yeah, so we recently seen you at NCCNA in Sacramento, California, which was interesting. That was my first trip to the West Coast, which I had a phenomenal time. It was so great to meet so many people that I made connections with on the podcast, and so many people that who listen, which was, it was just it was a beautiful time. I was wondering about your experience. That's, I'm sure that's not your first time there.
No, actually, I was there in 1987. That was the
Oh.
last time before that. So it was different. It was different. I was there when I had like 2 or 3 years clean, and I got to come back, and it was in Sacramento, and that's such a great venue there with the hotels right there and all the restaurants, and there's a river, and it's gorgeous. The weather was nice. There's a park across the street, and they did such a good job. So I'll be back, you know.
Yeah, the park was beautiful too. I took some time, I think maybe Saturday, and went through the park. Francis was upset with me because I missed the clean time countdown, but I was just mesmerized by the park. It was so beautiful.
They have they have this clean time countdown in North Alabama at Mason's home convention that I experienced, and it was like we have a similar convention in Northern California called TAC, but they brought this crazy Southern revival energy to their clean time countdown where people were like dancing in the aisles. And, like, I thought they were going to bring some rattlesnakes out, and, like it was like one of those old schooly churches or something. But like so, I did want them to experience the Northern California clean time countdown just because of the how massive it is. Not that we dance in the aisles, we're very serious about our clean time countdown, but it's impressive just based on how big it is. So that was
Yeah.
why I was said. I'm like, you're missing it, Mason. You're out
Well,
in nature right now.
I'm going to tell you something. I've seen clean time countdowns all over the place, and the one that I really remember was the one in uh, Montreal. Okay, and the way they do it is they start from a high number, but every time they say, 45, 44, they'll play a song from 44 years ago or 45 years, and it's just a pounding song, and they get up and they go crazy. And when they get to the newcomer and they get to the person with like 1 or 2 days, they're going crazy. There's the lights are off, there's like disco balls, it's just like flashing lights. And then what they do is they put the newcomer on the freaking table where we just ate, and they're like raising them up. It was insane.
Wow.
Yeah, so they got a lot of joy going on over there.
You were one of the speakers at NCCNA. What was that experience like? That's a lot of people, man.
Yeah, it's a lot of people. It's like freaking Woodstock. From you're standing on stage, and it's pretty it's nerve-wracking, to tell you the truth. And and when you speak into a microphone like that, there's a lot of echo. And so, you just have to kind of pay attention to the people in the front row, and get that energy back, because the rest of it's too much, you know. Yeah, but it was, I never know how that's going to go. But, I think all in all, I was, I felt good right when I started. You never know how that's going to go. You say a prayer, and you just, the fundamental way that the program works is one addict sharing with another.
Yeah.
And if you're asked to speak, if I'm asked to speak and I share somewhere, to bring it back to that right before I walk up there, and to ask for, that process to be there. And that's it. It is the best way to go. And so, anyway, I loved it. I didn't get booed, so.
Oh, you done great. Are you a person who thinks about what you're going to talk about or takes notes or any of that, or you just go up there and just let it flow?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I always think about what I'm going to share. I can't imagine being a main speaker and not thinking about that.
Yeah.
Um, but that's not always what happens, right? When you get
Yeah.
up there. I do uh, it's probably better for me to kind of go chronological. You know, it says it says that we share in a way that what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And I think just to follow that format is good. But uh, I've been clean for 40 years, and I have so much experience being clean that I have a lot of stories. I'm kind of a storyteller anyway, and so I just start telling stories. That's kind of
Yeah.
how it is.
I love storytellers too, by the way, and I think that's why I enjoyed you speaking so much. It was you have some incredible crazy stories too that's wild, but I like the fact that you talked on I have this 40 years experience of recovery. You know, that's always a critique that people give speakers sometimes is you hear people go, "Oh, they use too long," you know. Which I think is unfair when you ask somebody who's got a year, 2 years, 3 years clean to not tell a large portion of their story is that. Like you've got this small portion of life that you've experienced in recovery. So I think it's really an unfair critique to get onto people for that. But now that you have 40 years, and I think that's why the Living Clean's got to be so great too, because it touched on a lot of topics that you experienced through that lifetime. And I think is why it's such a perfect book for that time in the fellowship. Like we have this 50-year history of experience. Why not share that?
Yep, totally agree. Totally agree.
How old were you when you got clean?
27.
Right. So you've been clean 40 years. So like that's pretty amazing. Like that. You probably have like I heard your story at the convention, and like what a wild ride that was in your addiction. But I imagine, like you probably have 1,000 stories of the 40 years in your recovery.
I do. And to tell you the truth, I usually, if I share, I do not share that, the active addiction stuff because it's not that important in most settings. What's important is like, what have you gone through, and what is it, how did you stay clean through that? And so that's generally what it's easier to concentrate on that stuff because there's so much of it. So yeah,
What was your first introduction to the fellowship? How did you become aware of it?
man, that's such a good question. So I'm glad you asked me that. Um, so this is about 6 months before I got clean. I went to court, and I was sitting in court, and a guy came in and sat next to me that I knew that I used with. And we were watching, the judge was going through uh, through his docket and sentencing people, and uh, and this guy's name was Chris, and Chris leaned over to me, uh, and he said, "Jimmy, we don't have to do this anymore." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" So this is probably early 1984. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "There's a place where people meet in rooms, and they're just like us, and they talk about what's going on with them, and through that process, they're able to stay clean." And I didn't know what he was talking about because I had never heard of anything like that before. And here's the thing, when one addict shares recovery with another addict, and they're truthful, there's this miracle that happens. And so I knew that he was just like me, and he had no reason to say this to me, right? And it was as shocking as it was to hear this. I knew he was telling me the truth, and that was the first time that I got a little bit of hope. Not that I thought I could do it or I would find it or anything like, but just I felt hope from this guy who was just as broken as me, waiting to get sentenced just like me, in a courtroom. So that was my first introduction. That's before I ever went to a meeting. And to tell you the truth, I really hope I get to talk about that guy later on.
Oh yeah, we'll get to that. Just on, when you were telling that story, you ever seen the movie Field of Dreams with Kevin
Yeah,
Costner?
sure.
It kind of reminds me of when he goes and sees the I forget the character's name, but he goes and sees the old guy in the town, and it goes back to the 70s, and he meets with Doc Graham.
Right.
And Doc Graham's telling his baseball story about how he never got to bat, and he said, there's a place where you can do things like that.
Yeah.
That's what your story reminded me of when he said, "There's a place where people like us meet, and there's a
Yeah.
place that you can go."
And there's a place. I don't know, man. If you're listening to this and that you're just finding this on the internet and you don't, you're new to being clean, there's a place you can go. Guaranteed.
Yeah.
And we got you.
So let's talk about that guy so we don't get sidetracked.
Okay. Yeah. So when I first walked into the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous, I had been in treatment for like 4 months, and H and I came up there a couple times at the end, and I knew that there was someplace I could go. So I went into this meeting for the first time, and when I walked in there, I was shocked by the uh, this separation that occurred. And it was like I brought my disease in there with me. I didn't know I had my disease anywhere. I thought I was good. I had 4 months in the treatment program up in the mountains. I'm ready. And I walked in there and I looked around and I said, man, none of these people are like me. And it was like my head was shutting down and shutting down. And my disease wanted me out of there. Because when I looked at you guys and I saw that you were clean, I just, my disease did not want any part of that. So, I listened for what drugs people used. And that was important to me because that's all I had. All I had was this junkie pride that I'm walking in with. And so I wanted you to have the same exact story that I had, or else you couldn't help me. And so anyway, I was in the meetings for 2 weeks, and this guy walked in, and he was like me, right? And his name was Chris, and he was like me, and I was so happy to see him, man. He was the one that told me about NA in court, and so I was just so glad that he was there, and I started hanging out with this guy, and this is a message to the newcomers. We both had very little clean time, but we hung close, and we made sure that. Uh, that the other person got to a meeting. You know what I mean? And we started going out of town and doing things. And before this guy started like, you know, uh, beating people and taking their money and shooting dope and all this stuff, he was an Eagle Scout. And that's a pretty advanced thing, right? And he was from Utah, right? So he knew how to camp and fish and all this stuff. He started taking me up to the mountains on the weekends, and I just fell in love with nature, and I started to feel my higher power. And my message to a newcomer is, if you're in the program, if you're just coming into the program, find someone else who's new. They say stick with the winners, but this person that's new, you may be able to tell them something you can't tell your sponsor. They may be exactly what you need. And we were going to conventions, and we were going out of town and doing things, and this guy saved my life. He saved my life. And so I can keep going because there's another part to this story.
Keep going.
Okay. So he was my best friend. And after 6 years, he had migraine headaches. And he would get this medication from the doctor for the migraines. And one day he couldn't get a hold of the doctor. It was Friday, and he went and got some medication on the street, and they were bad migraines. I don't have migraines, but I know people that have migraines, and it's rough. So anyway, he started using. He just that one time he went out and got something and it triggered. And so he lived across, he lived in the same apartments I lived across the way. And I watched him use and come back and use and come back and use and come back. And it was so painful. You know, if you know you had a friend that you loved that you watched do that. And so anyway, one day he was at my house. It was on a Sunday, and he just came over, and he was high, and he kept saying the same thing over and over, like sometimes we do when we're high, you know. And I said, Chris, I got to ask you to leave. And he said, why? I said, well, because you're high. And he knew it because he had 6 years clean. He understood what I was saying, and he was dejected, and he put his head down, and he walked you know, he walked out, he walked back into his apartment. And the next morning he got up early before work, and he shot some dope, and he fell on his feet, and on the way down he hit his head on the countertop, and he landed in a place where the coroner picked him up 8 hours later. And
Mm.
his mom, you know, asked me if I would share at his funeral, if I would say a few words, and I did it. And you know, at that time, even with 6 or 7 years clean, I was still pretty good at pushing down feelings, you know, pushing down feelings. And so I really didn't cry. I didn't really, you know, it was like I'm just gonna go through this. I don't know what I thought, but I sucked it up, you know. So I did it. I shared at his funeral, and a couple weeks um, later, I was driving down the street, and you know, he just came to mind, and I just started feeling the loss of my friend, and I pulled into this park, and there was nobody there but me, and I was just sitting in the parking place, and I started asking God, you know, why did you take Chris? Why'd you take him? And I heard this like whisper voice, and it was that some people have to die so that others can live. And when I heard that, I was so mad. And all I know is I blacked out, you know. And when I came to, I was crying. I was finally crying. And all the tears came from how much I loved him. And I think that day I discovered what it was like to be a friend in Narcotics Anonymous and what it was like to have a friend. And I try to never take that for granted because, you know, we mean so much to each other. And these moments that we share uh, are so beautiful. And addicts who use don't get these moments. And they're so important, you know. So anyway, that's the story of my friend Chris. And today, you know, look, the truth is that he deserves to be here just as much as I do, you know, and he would be so proud of me that I took 40 years and that I was able to do this thing, and that he's the one that told me about it. And so sometimes I do that thing where I'll look at a chair in a meeting, an empty chair, and I'll put him in that chair. So anyway, I'll forever be in debt, you know, to that new relationship that I got in NA that brought me to where I am today.
First of all, thank you for sharing that. Um, but in the beginning, you talked about how comfortable it was when or how happy you were when he walked into the meeting for the first time. I know when I got clean, I still am close, really close with the people who got clean at the same time that I did. You know, and it's like it's important for people who's been there for a while to share love on the newcomer, but the newcomer is just as important to the newcomer as well. You
You're
know,
so right.
yeah, yeah. I don't think that gets talked about enough. You know, it's It would be, it's very difficult if you're the only newcomer there, the only person who's gotten clean in the last 5 years in a meeting. Think about how unreal that would be.
Well, what you said reminded me of this other thing too. When we get clean in our early recovery and we are learning about what it's like to stay clean, like, to go to work and to not steal and to go to the meetings and try to, aspire to spiritual principles. And the people that we are around mean so much to us. So whatever that scene is like what you like you hold dear. So a lot of times what happens is people move to another place and they go, it's just not like it was where I got clean. I'm like, that's because you got clean there. That's
Yeah.
because of all the things. I don't care how the format of the meetings, or whether there was a smoke break, or whatever the other incidentals are. The truth is that was where your miracle started. Of course, you would think that.
Yeah.
And so, uh, a message to people who think that this new area that they're in is not as good as their other one, take a look at that, because we're all doing something right in every area.
You're helping make that place special for the newcomer that's getting clean there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we don't get to pick who stays, which kind of sucks. Maybe that's the beauty of the third tradition. But there's kind of there's some women that have stuck around that got clean the same year I did. I'm pretty sure Shanna's sponsor is one of those women. And and when I see her, she's still like that young person, like that person that got clean at 22 years old. There's something like that when I just see these people that have stayed clean with me for 32 years. There's an impression of them. Like my memory goes back to all of us as young people, and
Yes.
I think of us as these 20-year-olds. We're not 20 anymore. We're almost 60. So uh, like what you were talking about, this is the right way to do it because this is the way I got clean. Is I think that there's some of that you were talking about. The Living Clean book is like, well, I got clean before there was any, like I was on a fifth edition basic text and a just for today. And that's all we really needed was the basic text. And now we have all these newfangled, like books. They don't really apply to me, but they do. There's I think the basic text is probably the most important book that we have because it was the first book that we have.
Right.
But I think the Living Clean is the best written, speaks to me the best. The most powerful book that that has come out. I'm not taking anything away from that one. Even though it's one of the newer books, it's powerful. And so new meetings aren't necessarily not as good as the old meetings. New formats count. Newcomers count. People with. I don't want to be limited to my litter of people that have 32 years. There's so few of us now. I can't stay clean. On old timers. I need the new batch of friends and the new batch of people that come in. Yeah.
Totally agree with all that, Francis. I think it's easy to get caught up in the nostalgia to think it was better for us when that happened, but the truth is, as far as NA goes, NA was just as strong and powerful back when we got clean as it is now. And I have to be open to the idea that this moment is the one that we have right now. And this moment is the magic right now with everything that's happened. And so I also have to be open to that maybe there's a new way that I don't know, or that I should try something that I don't know, because this is what's happening, you know. And that reminds me of something else, if I can tell
Go
this
for it. Yeah.
story. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you guys met my sponsor, Billy.
Yeah.
Man, I love this dude, right? So uh, I got clean in 1984. I got a sponsor. I had that sponsor for, I don't know, maybe 14 years, something like that. And I went through the steps with this guy, and then he kind of broke off from NA, and he started doing this other thing. He started following the red way. I don't know if you know what that is, but he did that and didn't come to NA. And I was sponsoring, and I was in service with H&I. I was very, very involved in Narcotics Anonymous, and he wasn't. And we started drifting more and more apart. And then finally, he wasn't my sponsor anymore, and I was sponsorless, right? And that happened for a couple years, and I kept looking around for a sponsor, and I couldn't. I didn't find the sponsor that I needed. And so finally I was desperate, and I was talking to a friend of mine, and my friend said, I got your sponsor, man. And I'm like, okay, okay. Like, I believe you,
Yeah.
it'll happen that way. And I said, who is it? And he said, it's Billy R. He's from Scottsdale. And as a matter of fact, he's sharing here at this little club this weekend. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go listen to him. So I went and I listened to Billy. And he did a great job, and when it was over, he went out to the parking lot, and I followed him out to the parking lot, and I need to ask him to be my sponsor with like 15 years clean or something, 16 years clean, and I'm like kicking rocks, and looking down, and and then I finally get up the courage. I said, listen, man, I need a sponsor. I have this much clean time. Somebody told me that should be you. What do you think? And he said, okay. And then he said, now the flat book, the step working guide had just come out. And he said, do you have a step working guide? And I was like, and I thought in my head, oh man, ah, dude, really? You're supposed to give me the Jimmy K stuff that was like the secret steps that were all passed on, and you want me to have a step working guide? Then I thought, I need a sponsor. And so instead of saying all that, I said, I will get one. I will get one. That's how that relates to, there's new literature, there's new things coming. I have to be willing to take a look at it. And so I went through the steps with a step working guide, and you know, uh, we evolve. The way I see it now when I look back is that the steps are about relationships.
Mhm.
The first three steps are about a relationship with a higher power. Steps 4 through 7 are about a relationship with self, and steps 8 and 9 are about a relationship with others. And I think 10, 11, or 12 are a continuation of that. God, self, and others. I think it's in. I'll tell you what. First, I'm going to tell you which one was the hardest. Okay, was step 6. I mean, step 6 is grueling, man. There's not a lot. Uh, Man, if you're on step 6 right now and you're struggling, and it just keeps asking me about these character defects, and just get through it, man. Just push through it. And step 6 is a trip because um, like when you come into the program, when you first get clean, everything changes. And I I kind of equate it to like driving around in a station wagon, right? You guys know what a station wagon is? You got the, not everybody does. It's got the long front end, and then the back of the station wagon is kind of like a spaceship, and it holds like 12 kids with no seatbelts, right? Well, it's like you're driving in the station wagon, and everything that you're doing when you're addicted is happening, and so every lie right, that you tell is in the back of the station wagon. Everything, every time you stole or disappointed your family or compromised yourself in some way, it's all in the back of the station wagon. And and getting clean is like slamming on the brakes and it all hits you in the head, you know?
Mm.
And and so, you know, that the sixth step is kind of like that. So but it's important to look at all that stuff. And now when you look back, you said it took every bit of that. It took every time I didn't show up. It took all the times that I disappointed my family or didn't show up for my kids or all that stuff to get to a place where I could sit there with a bottom and with that despair and walk into a meeting and have nowhere else to go, you know. Okay, so to answer your question, I know I'm long-winded, is my absolute favorite step is the ninth step. This is the ninth step. Because especially in regard to forgiveness, because the forgiveness I have has been the greatest gift to me, and it sits with me, and it opened up a part of me that was so shut down and blocked, you know, to love. And I have a couple stories about forgiveness that are just changed my life. So it for me, it's the ninth step.
If you don't mind, can we ask about some of those stories about forgiveness?
Yeah, absolutely. So you heard me when I was sharing on NC about my daughter. Well, I'm
Yeah.
going to share another story. So that story, just if you're listening, is really a story um, about something that I did. You know, when it comes to forgiveness, it's either something that you did to someone else or something that someone else did to you. It's one of those two things why you need the forgiveness. And the story I told there was about what happened with my daughter and what I gave her while I was using and how I got forgiveness from that. But I'm going to tell a different story. I'm going to tell a story about me, about my childhood. And I grew up in a family of six kids. Both my parents were alcoholics. There was a lot of trauma. Sometimes in your family, uh, there's an abuser and they'll pick one child, right? And I drew that ticket. My dad was a blackout drunk and he used to beat the shit out of me. And then he wouldn't remember the next day. And I would be hiding. Like he would come at 2 o'clock in the morning. He would come get me and take me out in the living room and torture me. And I would hide from him. So that's kind of what my childhood was like. And when I went through the first set of steps and I got to the eighth step, I couldn't put his name on there. I didn't think that he deserved, any kind of, I didn't think that there was an amends needed because of what happened to me. But as I continued to stay clean, I realized I wanted to be free. I wanted to be free from how I felt about this guy. And the last time that I saw my father, uh, I was 22. And so when I was like 39 and I had been clean for, I don't know, 14 something years, I don't know how long, but, uh, but I was going through the steps again. When I got to the eighth step, I wrote down my father's name. Finally, I'm finally ready to look at this, and I don't even know what to do. And so I had a sponsor, and the sponsor was saying, you know, uh, you have to find forgiveness for this guy. And so I started looking for him. I hadn't seen him for all this time, didn't know where he was. So he was a Marine, you know, in his early life. So I wrote a letter to the VA. And I said, do you know where my father is? And they said, he died a year ago. And they gave his cremains to somebody in LA named Paul Rodriguez. And I still had work to do. So I wanted to go find this guy, Paul Rodriguez, just to talk to him about my dad. Like, how did you know him? Why were you somebody that they gave the cremains to? And so, I had an LA phone book, and it had, I looked up Paul Rodriguez. They had about one page of Paul Rodriguez's in there, and I started making phone calls, and finally, I wrote to the address that they had on when they sent me back the information from the VA, and on Easter Sunday in 1998, I got a phone call from this guy named Paul Rodriguez, and he said, I knew your dad. And I said, well, how'd you know him, Paul? And he said, I knew him from Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, your dad died with 14 years clean.
Wow.
And you might think that I would be happy about that, but what I thought was, don't they have a ninth step over there? And because come on, man. And so I still had work to do. So I went to meet Paul Rodriguez, and my brother-in-law and I drove down to LA. And we went to Paul's house, and he invited us in. We introduced us to his wife, and he had this like metal box with my father's ashes, and he tried to give it to me, and I balked, and I stepped back, and I said, "You hold on to that, Paul." And the truth is that I realized in that moment is that I wasn't ready to forgive my dad. As much NA as I had at that time, as much is I knew that I needed to do this and I needed freedom, I was not there. So I said, Paul, you hang on to it. And I continued to have a relationship with Paul and his wife, and they come to Vegas, and my wife and them, we all go out and we reciprocate, and we go to LA. And one day I was down there, it was about a couple years later, and I called up Paul and I said, hey, Paul, we're in LA. And he said, I just bought this house. And uh, he said, I want you to come see it. I said, come get us. So he scoops us up, takes us over to East LA, and he pulls up to this house. And it's just a little, modest home in East LA, but I could just tell he was so happy, right? And so he wants to take us on a tour of this house, a little 3-bedroom, 2-bath, square kind of house. And we walk in, and we're in the living room. And when I walk in, I see this bookshelf, and I'm drawn to this bookshelf. This bookshelf has everything that meant something to Paul. It had his AA coin up there, and it had, Tommy Lasorda bobblehead, and pictures of his friends and his family, and then there's my dad's ashes, right? And so he's trying to give us this tour of his house, and I am locked into this bookcase. I told my wife, I said, you take the tour, I'm going to stay here. And this is this program is a miracle, and things come to us when they're supposed to come to us, and it is of spirit. It is of spirit. And in that moment, in that living room, my dad came to me, and he spoke to me, and he said, I couldn't come back. I didn't know how. All I knew how to do was to help one alcoholic, and that was Paul Rodriguez. You see, when my dad met Paul Rodriguez, my dad had a couple years clean, and and they were both military. And so my dad said, you can come live with me. And Paul was a guy, he was a, bottom drunk dude that used to get the liquor out of the bottom of the bottles that he would find and all that kind of stuff. So my dad got him clean, man, and Paul went on to get 2 master's degrees. He became history teacher at a university. And, in that moment, in that living room, I was washed with forgiveness for everything that my dad ever did to me. And it was so interesting because not only was I washed for forgiveness, but I was given a vision of what happened to him. Because I never understood it, Like when I was a little kid and he was beating me, I used to think, why are you doing this? Like I knew I was good, I knew that. and then and I was given this vision of what happened to him, and so I could finally understand it. And sometimes it takes the understanding also, you know. And there's this quote by Mark Twain, and I love this quote, and it is that forgiveness is the scent that the flower leaves on the heel that has crushed it. Forgiveness is the scent that the flower leaves on the heel that has crushed it. And all of us have been the heel, and all of us have been the flower. And so, forgiveness is so important to an addict, because we all have these little details, man, and we walk around with them. And it's important, on a look at our symbol, and at the top of the symbol is freedom. And there's freedom from so many things, but the freedom that keeps us down because of our resentments is one of the strongest ones. And I no longer have any resentments from my dad. None. They are gone. And it's incredible. So the long answer to your question, the ninth step has been my favorite step.
Such a beautiful story, man. That is, yeah, thank you for sharing that. You may have to tell some of our listeners what a phone book is, but
No, well, all right.
yeah, yeah.
How
But
about the sponsorship question from Bill?
Okay, what was it?
It was, what is your most cherished gifts? What are the most cherished gifts and that he's received from being clean and in NA?
Well, I would definitely include him as one of them. You know, it's really a miracle, the relationship that we can have with a sponsor, and how some of us are untrusting and we don't know even how to do this. But what we learn is that we need to share openly, regardless of how we feel. We need to share it with another person. And when we do that, there's a miracle that happens. And with Billy, he's sponsored me for 25 years, and I have gone through so many things with him, and I've shared it all. And I can tell him even the most petty stuff that I don't want to say, you know, and he still loves me, So sponsorship has been one of the most wonderful gifts. I remember my first sponsor when I did my fifth step with him, and there were a couple of things that I had some shame about. I could talk about them today. It's not a problem, but you know, there were things that I just never saw myself talking about to anybody. And so I shared my fifth step with the guy. I spent like 3 hours at his house, and then I went home, and then there was these two things that I didn't say, and I'm there, and he said, go home and get with God. And he goes, because we've done this process, it says, admit to yourself, God, and others, the exact nature, right? And so I didn't admit to him the exact nature. And when I went to go, get with God, God said, hey, you missed this part, right? So I called him back and I went over there and I told him everything. And here's what I learned about that. What I learned is that we think that we're going to tell our sponsor something that is somehow going to make them not love us, you know? That's what we're worried about. But the truth is that when we tell the truth in his exact nature, they love us even more, you know. So, that kind of gift coming back from the sponsor has been one of the greatest things. But I think the greatest thing is it talks about in our literature, it is the ability to find out who we are, to dig and dig and dig and go underneath the layers of the onion and then find this person that was there, that's always been there. That's always been there. And we find out things that we like to do. and we start experiencing those things, and we find great joy in the actual person that we are. Wow, what a gift that is. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, it's so funny you brought that up because I was just fixing to ask that question because of the story that you shared with us about your dad. And I think about, the situation that you went through and what that I guess maybe the forgiveness of your dad and that whole process was one of those layers of the onion that unlocks something that's been inside of you for a long time that maybe that situation caught the situation you went through as a child, maybe that's what had that locked up or locked away, and the forgiveness was the key to unlocking that.
Exactly right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah. Um, and these things, they don't happen overnight. And so if you're a new person and you want relief, man, you just want it to be okay. My message is it will be okay. It's just not going to be perfect right now. And that's why you have to remember to put one foot in front of the other and just try to do the right thing, and try to help another addict. That's the real key, to try to help someone. I mean, that is the big component in the recipe, you know, is helping somebody else. So yeah.
Yeah, I run a little aftercare program, and that's what I always try to tell them. I was like, I'm going to give you the secret right up front. The secret is you're going to work on yourself so that you can help other people, and
Right.
that's the secret to staying clean. Is you get enough of yourself out of the way so that you can help somebody else.
Yeah.
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 Like if we could just snap our fingers and get fixed overnight, I don't think it would be as rewarding as the journey. Then when you look back on it, are you grateful that it took the time that it did to get to where you're at now?
Well, I don't think it could have happened any other way. So, in that regard, yes. I mean, I'm still somebody that wants it right now, but but the truth is that you don't get it right now, and I'm thankful that it all came with the time that I have today. And as an older person, um, I'm at peace, and it just that peace took some time. Um, I feel compelled to tell another story. I don't know how much time we
Yeah.
have.
Uh, as
This is
much,
important to me.
yeah, go for it.
Okay, so um, when I was clean for about 6 or 7 years, and I was working construction, and I got hurt and I couldn't do my job anymore. Right. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was going to the meetings, and I was sharing. I really didn't know what I was going to do. And there was this guy at the meeting listening to me, and when we walked out afterwards, and we used to hang around the parking lot, he come up to me and he said, "Hey, I heard what you said in there, and I think I might be able to help you." I'm like, "Oh, okay, I'm all ears. What's up?" And he said, "Well, I'm a real estate appraiser." And I was like, "Okay." And he said, "Well, I need an intern." And man, I didn't know what he was talking about. Right. This is in the early 90s. It was 1991. I had no idea what he was talking about, right? And I said, "Well, tell me about it." He goes, "Well, I look at homes, and I evaluate them, and then I come up with a number, and I do it for a bank, and I had to write these reports." And every time he said something like that, I thought, no way I can do this. And so I said, "Well, what do I have to do?" He said, "Well, you have to go back to school, and you'll have to get a license, and all this stuff." And I thought, I can't do that. Well, first of all, I quit school in the ninth grade, right? And moved and ran away. Quit school in the ninth grade. And I stopped listening in the fourth. I have ADD and dyslexia. So going back to school was not something I could even imagine, right? And then I had 6 felonies. all for dope, all of them, right? And I thought, well, they're not going to give me the license. So I'm back to the meeting the next day, and the guy wasn't there, and I started sharing about how I didn't know what I was going to do. I was running out of money, and this guy offered me this position, and they said, just try it. That's what the people in NA said. They said, just try it. And so, just try it for me meant that I had to go back to get a GED, and I had to get this 16-year-old girl to help me with eighth grade math so I could like learn how to get a GED, right? In the meantime, the guy's having me take pictures for him, and I'm kicking down a little bit of money. I'm just barely making it, and then I had to start taking these courses at the community college, right? And so I'm in my 30s, and everyone else is in their like late teens and early 20s, and and I and school's tough anyway, and so I decide I'm going to sit in the front seat because when I was a little kid, because of my learning disability and all this, I used to find the biggest kid and sit behind him so that they would never call on me, right? Because I couldn't follow the book. And so I get there, I get the book open. I'm taking these these college classes, and 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 I just every time I didn't understand something, I would raise my hand, and the instructor would get sick of me raising my hand. And the reason why I raised my hand is because I remember in NA they said if you don't know something, that's not who you are. It's just that you don't know it. So you need to ask questions. You need to humble yourself and ask the questions. And so finally I remember she said, talk to me after the class. And so she was able to explain to me in certain ways how, that I could understand how this works. So I had to write a letter to the real estate division because they could see my record, And I said, look, I have an opportunity here to go to school and to be able to work and help my family and will you allow me to do this? And they said, yeah, we'll give you an internship. So they gave me an internship, and I started working. I continued to go to 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 finish all the classes, everything that was needed. It was 2.5 years. And when that was over, I had to write them another letter and say, look, I've fulfilled all of these things. I'm still clean. And will you allow me to have a license? And they said, take the test. And they gave me 3 chances to take this test. Not good at tests. I failed the first one. I failed the second one. And man, I studied and studied and studied, and I passed the third one. And I became a real estate appraiser. And I've been doing that for 34 years. 34 years this month. And I've been able to take care of my family. And this is, this message about, my message about this is to the person that just thinks it's not going to work for them because of their situation. We have this situation and this story that thinks we think holds us back. When the truth is that when we stay clean, doors open, and there's so many miracles that can happen. And a miracle happened for me. And in July, I'm going to stop working. Right? I'm 68 years old. I'm tired. I'm going to stop working, and I'm going to enjoy some of the rest of my life by traveling and doing some things that I haven't been able to do because I've been working a lot. And all of that has been a gift. All of that has been a gift. So.
Because when I first got clean, several of us, people that I got clean with around the same amount of clean time, we all decided we wanted to we were all still single. We're all married now, but we wanted to take a trip to somewhere. So we decided to go to South Beach in Miami, right? We had a blast. It was fun. But my thoughts while I was there is how in the hell do people get clean here? For me to get the kind of temptation that it's available on every street corner, it's a 2 hour trip either direction. And you're a person who lives in a place that's very similar to that. Temptation is like at, just a phone call away or just walking down the street, So what do you
Sin,
say to
Sin
that?
City.
Yeah, it's labeled Sin City. So, what do you say to a person who may be listening from a similar situation and they think the only way that they can get better is to leave that place completely? What was your experience with that? Did you struggle with any of those temptations, knowing that they were just so readily available to you? Uh, or does that even make sense at all?
Yeah, no, you're right. I got clean in Las Vegas. It's 24/7. Every kind of vice that you could possibly think about is at your disposal at 4 o'clock in the morning, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It never stops. So I can share what happened to me. And what happened to me was that I got to the end of the road, just like it talks about in that reading when we're at the end of the road. And the only thing I had when I got clean was despair. That was it. And the despair is what kept me coming back. I knew if I used that I would either die or go to prison or both, and so it was that despair that just kept bringing me back over and over and over until things got good. So I lived with that pain as I went to meetings. And in Las Vegas, it's there we have some of the best recovery there is because of that, I think.
Yeah.
Because of that, because, and a lot of times what happens is people have a little bit of clean time and they move to Las Vegas and they think they can gamble a little bit. If they're an addict, man, it just pops up over there, right? And hopefully they stay clean. I had a little experience with that after I got clean. Before I got clean, I'll never gamble, man. I needed that money for dope. There was no way I wanted to take a chance of not having that if I had a couple bucks in my pocket, right? But after I get clean, I, get paid on Friday, you know, go across the street, get my paycheck and cash it, start putting quarters in the machine. And there was a while, like after a couple years, that I started gambling. And I didn't really want to tell anybody. And I would go over there and I would spend a bunch of my paycheck. I'd leave there at midnight. Then I'd have to wake up on Saturday and call somebody and say, "Hey, can you float me some money?" And not tell them why and all this kind of, this disease thing. And then and then finally I just got to a place where my sponsor said, "Look, you know, uh, maybe you need to treat this like dope and not do it at all." And so, the freedom came when I stopped altogether. And then, I started, understanding, the value of like a gallon of milk again. Because, when you're gambling, man, you can either have, you either have nothing or all of a sudden there's a jackpot and you're insane. You're insane,
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So I guess I had to go through some of that after I got clean, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was telling you about that trip to Miami, and actually, the way that we could all afford it because most of us were working at low-level jobs in treatment centers, making hardly any breadcrumbs. And the way that we afforded it is because we started doing this thing after Saturday night meetings where we would go over to somebody's house and we would play poker for like quarter, dimes, and nickels. And with a bunch of addicts, the quarters, dimes, and nickels progress to fives and tens, tens and twenties, to fifties, to hundreds. To I was hosting a game at my house where thousands and thousands of dollars are going over the table, and I was a beneficiary of that for a little bit. And so we started taking these trips, and I was helping my buddies, and but you're right, like it feels. It's like that thing that you carry around that you can't talk to your people about. Like all the people I'm around are trying to get better in all these different areas of their life, and it's like this little secret that I really can't talk about. It kind of feels uh dirty.
Well, I know that there's people that do that. I know there's people that are clean that have poker games, and what I've noticed for myself is that, whenever I've gone anything like that, um, that somebody had to lose.
Yeah.
Somebody that I care about had to walk out of there, and and I don't know why. I'm just sensitive or something like that, but or empathetic, but I can see it. I can see it on your face, when you're not, you know, when you're not a winner,
Yeah.
and then the rest of us did it. We helped with that. And so I don't like going to those things.
Yeah.
It reminded me a little bit of when you were talking about your fifth step and you went home and you still had something left that you needed to bring back to your sponsor.
Yeah.
Like keeping something on the side or on the down low. Like there's the God knows, like if you're in line with your higher power on something or out of line with your higher power on something, you're probably either keeping it on the down low or not,
Well,
So it reminded me of what you were saying. I'm like, yes, that's that.
that's why a 10 step is so important, I think. You know, really be able to check ourselves and ask ourselves, uh, you know, uh, some questions that are real, like, am I holding on to any secrets? You know, that is uh, that is so profound because that's where the disease lives. It lives in the secret, and it'll live in a small secret. It just wants somewhere to live. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And so if you have, that kind of a secret little side life going on, I don't believe that we can get the freedom or really attach ourselves to the spiritual principles of the program because we are limiting ourselves to, through the recovery that's available to us by holding on to a secret.
Yeah.
And then when you tell that secret, this is such so cool, is that when you grab somebody and you tell them the secret that you've been holding on to, the disease has nowhere to live. And you might
Yeah.
feel a little shame or something like that, but you have just kicked the disease out of your life when you tell that secret. And there's some kind of and then it's filled where that secret was becomes grace in that place where that secret was. And but 10 step is really important, um, for stuff like that.
You talked about you got retirement that's coming up. You're 68. You've been clean 40 years. So what's left on the table for you to do? How do you approach life? Is it still just this one day at a time, live in the moment sort of thing? Do you think about the future at all, or?
I do think about the future, especially now because the retirement isn't perfect. I mean, I told you about that I'm able to retire, but I don't have this great retirement. If I look at it and I focus in, I'm like, oh, there's kind of is right there, if I do it right. But yeah, I mean, you know, with the practice of meditation helps you to live in this moment and breathe this breath right now and feel what it's like to be here right now. And this is the only moment we have. This is the only moment we have to recover. This is the only moment we have to take this breath and to live and have this gift of life. Um, so I'm a little distracted from that message right there. Like I said, I have ADD, dude. No, something shiny goes by, and I'm like, whoop, over here. So, what was I talking about? So, okay.
Retirement.
So, but I will tell you this, okay? I have had this bucket list thing that I wanted to do, and it's to take a motorcycle ride around North Vietnam. And I haven't rode a motorcycle since I was a kid, and I rode a lot of motorcycles, so I know how to ride one. Um, And so in October, I'm going to take the whole month of October and go to Vietnam and ride all around and see these beautiful waterfalls and things like that. So, I have plans like that. I love to travel and see friends. I have a wife and a dog and I have a wonderful life. But as we get older, because there are losses, and because there are, medical diagnoses and aches and pains and all these things, that really all we have is this day. And so I need to learn how to live in this moment and be grateful, but does not have my head be all over the place. But I'm excited for what the next 10 years brings. I'm excited. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jimmy, you're so much fun to talk to, man. I really appreciate you. And I appreciated our conversation catching up with you in California. That was so cool. Yeah. And, I really hope that, I take some of that with me, like to the way that you are so approachable and so easy to talk to. I just want to be that for other people too, man. And I really appreciated you spending that time with us and talking with us, man.
You are that way, Mason. So are you, Francis. You
Thank you.
guys are that way. I listen to you, and I listen very closely, to everything, and I see the kind of people that you are. And thank you so much for doing this. And you have a way, Mason. Your voice is like, oh man, it's soothing, And, but I know you're not asking me this question, but I want to answer it anyway, because Francis, you talked about this before. It's like, what would you say to the newcomer? What would you say to the newcomer? And so I want to answer that. So to the newcomer who's just coming into this program and listening to this podcast, your head's going to tell you all these things that you can't do. And you're going to have all these hang-ups in your story and you're going to wonder if it's going to work for you, and what I will tell you is that if you put one foot in front of the other and you try to do the right thing and you help another person, that you not only can stay clean, but you'll be given this freedom, this incredible freedom that I can't even properly describe in words. And I believe that the reason why you're listening to this and the reason why you're here is because that freedom is in front of you, And so, yeah, that's what I would say. Is it let us believe in you if you can't believe in yourself, and share where you're at, and find somebody and tell them your truth, because that's the greatest gift of this program. Because when two addicts share and then they want recovery, there is a miracle that happens. And that miracle is waiting to happen for you over and over and over and over if you continue to do those things.
Perfect way to wrap it up.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Yeah. Yeah, the last thing I would say is there's a place for people like us.
It sure is, man.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
All right, folks. We'll be back next week with another episode. We'll see you then.
Thank you for joining us on our Living Clean podcast. This is another platform that we can share our message of recovery, which is any addict can stop using drugs, lose a desire to use, and find a new way to live. Join that no matter what club. You can contact us through text. The number is 931-306-9364.